Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're jumping right into the stack of sources you shared, a whole bunch of trending posts from X, specifically from May 30th, 2025.
Yeah, and our goal here is to, quickly pull out the most interesting bits from today's online chatter, cut through the noise, basically, and see what's really driving the conversation.
Absolutely. And
Yep.
what's great about looking at these X posts is just the sheer range. We got, well, everything in these sources, space dreams, tech frustrations we can all relate to.
And then market shifts, big political statements, even some huge pop culture moments. It's really like a snapshot of the digital vibe today.
Totally. So let's start by looking up, way up, towards Mars, actually.
Okay, yeah, space ambitions, and maybe a bit of a reality check, too.
Kicking things off, we saw that post from @Elon Musk sharing these really cool Starship to Mars concept pictures. Looking at that art, it really makes the idea feel kind of real, doesn't it?
It does capture the imagination. And the sources, they connect those pictures to SpaceX's actual plan. It's super ambitious. They mentioned SpaceX announced a goal back in 2024 for 5 uncrewed missions by 2026.
5 uncrewed. Just practice runs, basically. Wow.
Yeah, just testing landings. It really shows you the scale of the challenge. It's all part of that bigger vision Musk has,
Yeah.
right? Making humanity multiplanetary.
Right. The million people, 1,000 starships plan.
Exactly. That's the long-term goal mentioned in the sources, transporting 1 million people over several launch windows, which only happen every, 26 months or so?
1 million people. It's like building a whole new world. But the sources also bring in let's say, the difficulties. There was a BBC report mentioned from May 2025 about another Starship mission failure.
Yeah, lost control, broke up in orbit, and the sources note this is the 3rd time that's happened.
Okay, so that definitely puts a question mark over the timeline for actually sending people, right? The 2029 target.
Absolutely. Setbacks like these, they clearly impact that kind of aggressive schedule.
So you see this amazing art, then you hear about these very real problems. Why do you think we're still so, captivated by Mars despite all this? Is it just the sheer audacity of it?
That contrast is definitely part of the story these sources are telling today.
Okay, let's shift gears. Pretty dramatically, back down to Earth, focusing on economic news. There was a post from @Unusual Whales, highlighted a pretty blunt headline about Canada.
Right. That post mentioned the TD chief economist saying Canada is entering a recession and expects another 100,000 job losses soon.
Oof, a specific number like that really makes you pay attention.
Yeah, and the source gets specific. It's TD Bank's chief economist, Beta Karanchi. Her forecast, as reported, is negative GDP growth for Q2 and Q3 of 2025.
And what's behind that? According to the sources, what's driving it?
It's chalked up to, weakness in the private sector, a housing market that's not really reacting to interest rates like they expected, and people just being cautious with spending. There's a Globe and Mail piece mentioned, citing Karenchi, suggesting the housing market's a big factor in maybe deeper contractions.
It's not just internal stuff, right? The sources also mention potential outside pressures.
Exactly. An opinion piece, also from the Globe and Mail, is referenced. It suggests potential U.S. tariffs, under a new Trump administration, could make things worse for Canada, especially given how much they rely on U.S. trade. What was it, 31.4% of GDP back in 2017?
Wow, yeah. And speaking of Trump and economic talk, the X feed definitely shifted south of the border, too. We saw that post from @PressSec, Caroline Levitt, claiming Trump is defeating the Biden inflation crisis and making America affordable again.
Right. That post highlighted one number specifically, core inflation, claiming it hit its lowest in 4 years, 2.8% in April 2025 under Trump.
2.8%. I mean, that sounds lower than recent years.
Yeah.
But what's the bigger picture the sources give us?
Well, the source notes that, 2.8% is down, but it's still, above the Fed's 2% target. It also mentions Trump's own stance on interest rates, referencing his criticism of Fed Chair Powell back on May 13th, 2025, saying rates should be cut faster.
Okay, so the claim about defeating inflation is there, but also this push for specific policy action.
And this is where the sources bring in a different angle. There's a Tax Foundation analysis from 2025 cited, and it suggests that the Trump-Biden tariffs have actually increased household costs by about $1,200 a year on average.
$1,200, wow.
And reduced GDP by 0.2%. So according to that specific analysis in the source, some trade policies might actually be working against the goal of affordability or boosting the economy.
Man, it really kind of shows how different data points, different analyses can paint such different pictures, doesn't it?
Yeah.
These sources show a really complex economic scene, Canada and the U.S., lots of different takes.
And that economic discussion, especially around the U.S. and trade, kind of flows right into the next big topic on X today, trade tensions, specifically involving China.
Yeah, we saw a few posts on this, at Gunther Eagleman and at Benny Johnson. They both quoted this really strong statement from Trump, "No more Mr. Nice Guy," and saying, China violated their agreement with us.
Very direct language, yeah. The source material gives us the background. It says this statement was made May 30th, 2025. Trump claiming China broke a recent trade deal, specifically a 90-day tariff suspension deal supposedly agreed just weeks before, May 12th.
Okay, so it sounds like a brief pause in the tension, and bam, right back to confrontation.
Pretty much. And the sources also brought up some specific online reactions to this kind of back and forth, right?
Oh, yeah, that is Zero Hedge post.
Right, referencing the acronym TACO, which the source explains stands for Trump Always Chickens Out.
TACO, that's a pretty blunt nickname.
The source notes it's used as commentary, kind of mocking a perceived pattern. Trump makes these big threats, high tariffs, maybe even using things like the IEPA.
Wait, the IEPA? What's that exactly?
The source mentions it, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Basically gives presidents broad power over trade during emergencies. The commentary in the source suggests Trump threatens big actions like that, which can shake markets. They mention the S&P dropping back on April 8th, 2025, but then tends to ease off. That's what the taco thing is getting at, according to the source's explanation of the commentary.
So it's commentary suggesting this cycle, threats, market reaction, then maybe easing back. And some online are calling it out cynically.
That's how the source presents that online chatter. Yeah. And it adds some historical context, too, citing a 2024 study from taxfoundation.org. It suggested Trump's earlier tariffs didn't really boost U.S. jobs in those protected industries and actually hurt U.S. farming because of retaliation.
Right, retaliatory tariffs.
Yeah, and that same study projected these 2025 tariffs could cost households that $1,200 figure annually we mentioned.
That specific cost keeps popping up in the sources.
It highlights the potential impact, yeah. The sources also hint at maybe a bigger U.S. strategy, mentioning a U.S.-UK trade deal from mid-May 2025 that China wasn't happy about. The source suggests it might be aimed at pushing Chinese products out of British supply chains, so more global trade friction.
Okay, let's shift gears again. Completely different direction. From global trade wars to something super personal, super relatable, everyday tech headaches.
Yes. This came from @Minxalana, posted, "We were supposed to have flying cars," classic line, but with a screenshot showing, get this, 11 missed potential spam calls in 1 hour.
Oh my gosh, I feel that screenshot. 11 in an hour. It just perfectly captures that feeling, doesn't it?
And the caption nails it, puts that everyday annoyance right next to all those promises of, amazing future tech, flying cars, robo-taxis. But here we are, still drowning in spam calls.
The future we were promised versus the tech reality we actually live in.
Exactly. The sources mentioned spam calls have apparently surged in 2025, partly blamed on maybe lax enforcement of rules like the TCPA.
TCPA.
Telephone Consumer Protection Act. U.S. law meant to stop unwanted calls. The source kind of implies maybe if it was enforced better, this wouldn't be so bad.
And the replies the source highlighted had some pretty cynical theories about why it's still happening.
Oh, yeah. Some users suggesting, maybe tech companies, maybe even the phone carriers aren't exactly motivated to stop it.
Why not?
Well, the theory goes maybe it pushes us off regular phone calls and onto their messaging apps instead, where they have more control, more data.
Interesting theory. Frustrate you with spam, so you use their app. Makes sense, sadly.
Yeah. And the sources mentioned some ideas floated in the replies for fixing it. Everything from charging spammers a tiny fee per call to using crypto somehow. It just shows how desperate people are for a solution.
It really makes you think, with all the amazing tech we do have, why is something so basic and annoying like spam still such a massive problem?
It's a fair question the sources raised with that post.
Okay, let's jump into pop culture now. Starting with some really big news that got a lot of traction. At Popbase reported, Taylor Swift now owns her masters.
Huge deal. For her, and honestly, it's seen as a big moment for the whole music industry. The source explains this finally settles that whole dispute that started back in 2019. When Scooter Braun bought Big Machine Records, which owned her original recordings, the masters, for her first 6 albums.
Right, she was really public about wanting to own her own work. The posts mentioned in the sources had pictures too, right? One with her surrounded by her albums.
Yeah, powerful image, like reclaiming them visually. And another was a letter to her fans. Her connection with them was key to her whole strategy, the sources point out.
And from a business angle, this must have cost a fortune.
Oh, yeah. The source mentions a May 2025 report estimating the price tag somewhere between $600 million and maybe even $1 billion. Massive investment. But the sources frame it as smart financially. Now she owns both the originals and those incredibly successful re-recordings she did. The big takeaway from the source, though, is how this is seen as setting a huge precedent for artists' rights and ownership.
A major win for her, potentially helping other artists too. Okay, shifting within pop culture, but to a different kind of discussion. A post from @GarbageHuman24 compared Tom Cruise and Kelly McGillis from the original Top Gun.
Right. It showed recent pictures of them side by side. The caption was, "What type of sorcery is this?" And it really highlighted the visual difference in how they seem to have aged.
Yeah, it was pretty striking. And the sources say this kicked off a big conversation about, well, gender and aging,
Right.
especially in Hollywood.
Exactly. A 2025 BuzzFeed article is cited in the source. It points out how guys like George Clooney get called silver foxes, right? But women face way more scrutiny as they get older.
That double standard.
Mm-hmm. And this comparison became a jumping-off point for the source material to explore potential reasons. For Tom Cruise, the source speculates it might be linked to his famous fitness and diet routine, which kind of aligns with research, like from the Journal of Aging Research mentioned, saying exercise and nutrition can impact how you look as you age.
Okay, makes sense. And for Kelly McGillis?
Well, the source contrasts her situation, points to those intense societal pressures on women, especially actresses. But it also brings in something really significant from her personal life, her history of trauma.
Oh, right. The source mentioned that.
Yeah, referencing a surviving serious assaults detailed in a 2016 People article cited in the source. It presents this factually as context for the discussion the post sparked.
That's heavy context.
It is. And the sources connect it to studies, like one from Nature Aging in 2020 mentioned, suggesting chronic stress from trauma might actually speed up biological aging, like shortening telomeres.
Telomeres, like the caps on chromosomes.
Exactly, like the plastic tips on shoelaces. The idea, based on studies the source references, is that chronic stress can wear them down faster, potentially affecting how cells age. The sources present this as one possible biological factor being discussed.
Wow. So one picture comparison on X leads to discussing societal standards, lifestyle, and even the deep biological impacts of trauma.
Shows how social media can tap into really complex issues, even with just an image.
And speaking of viral moments lingering, @Greg16676938542 asked that question. Did we ever figure out what she saw? Talking about Tiffany Gomez.
Ah, yes, the not real woman from the plane. Instantly recognizable. The sources remind us it was July 2024 American Airlines flight at DFW. She accused someone of stealing AirPods, got upset, demanded to get off.
And delivered that unforgettable line about a passenger not being real.
Exactly. Total viral explosion. And this post asking, what did she see? And all the funny, speculative replies mentioned in the source, kangaroos, ghosts, lookalikes, just shows how that moment is still kind of stuck in the online zeitgeist.
People are still joking about it, still wondering.
And the sources add a bit of academic perspective here, citing a 2024 UT Dallas study on disruptive passengers. The key point from that study, as the source presents it, incidents like hers are actually super rare.
Really? Feels like we hear about them all the time.
Well, that's the social media effect, right? The study suggests these rare events get massively amplified online and stick around way longer than they otherwise would.
Makes sense. Like a perfect storm for a viral moment. Bizarre, rare, caught on camera.
Exactly what social media loves to amplify.
Okay, let's loop back towards politics a bit, but maybe with more human angle. There was that post from @SawyerMerritt quoting Elon Musk talking about the Trump administration. Musk said something like, it's not like I agree with everything. I agree with much, but we have differences of opinion.
Yeah, the sources frame this as Musk trying to strike a balanced tone. He's backed Trump's re-election financially, the sources note, and he's been involved in policy discussions, like on a government funding bill, which, the sources say, sparked debate about his influence.
So the sources kind of suggest he's walking a line, supporting but also keeping some distance.
That seems to be the interpretation presented in the sources, a strategic approach to his public political comments, balancing support and independence, maybe to manage reputational risk.
And then, on a totally different, almost kind of funny note, there is that post from @Autism Capital about Elon Musk showing up with a black eye.
Oh, yeah, and the sources captured that exchange. A reporter asks about EI, and Musk jokes about not being near France, alluding to that Macron incident.
Huh. Classic Musk deflection using current events.
Totally. But the sources reveal the real story is much more, well, domestic. The black eye. It was apparently from roughhousing with his 5-year-old son, Lil X, as the sources call him.
Oh, the perils of parenting a 5-year-old. Happens to the best of us.
Exactly. And what's interesting, the sources point out the setting for this. It happened during a press conference in the Oval Office.
Seriously, in the Oval Office?
Yeah, while he was wrapping up his advisory role on the Trump administration's DOGE initiative, which the sources note some viewed as not particularly successful.
Wow. So you've got this very normal personal mishap, a black eye from your kid, happening in this incredibly formal high-power setting while discussing politics. That's quite a mix.
It definitely adds an unexpected, very human layer to the political narrative the sources picked up on.
Okay, one last topic. Let's circle back to space, but from a completely different angle. Historical, political. Came up in a post from @GrowingDaniel saying, bro, I got some bad news, referencing J.D. Vance.
Right. The source explains Vance was on Newsmax, as cited, arguing the U.S. space program, the moon landing, it was all built mainly by Americans, and that the U.S. doesn't really need foreign talent for big achievements like that.
And the bad news from the post is, that's not quite historically accurate, according to the sources.
Exactly. The sources offer a major historical correction. Vance's claim kind of ignores huge contributions from foreign scientists, especially German scientists like Wernher von Braun. They were brought over after WWII through Operation Paperclip.
Operation Paperclip. Right, I've heard of that. Bringing German scientists over.
Yeah, the sources say Paperclip recruited over 1,600 German scientists and engineers. Von Braun, who developed the V-2 rocket for Nazi Germany, he ended up leading the NASA team that built the rockets for the Apollo moon missions.
Wow.
So the sources stress, despite their pasts, these foreign scientists were absolutely critical to U.S. rocketry and the space race win, which, directly challenges Vance's idea it was all homegrown American talent alone.
That's a really significant piece of history to leave out of that argument.
The sources also point out a bit of irony, noting that Vance himself is married to an Indian-American lawyer, which they contrast with his criticism of importing foreign talent.
Huh. That's a sharp observation from the sources.
And it broadens out the point beyond just the space program. The sources mention immigration, things like H-1B visas.
Those are for skilled workers, right?
Yeah, temporary visas for skilled foreign workers, often in STEM. The sources argue these programs show foreign workers have been vital to U.S. innovation for ages and still are, citing things like their role in developing COVID-19 vaccines as another example.
So the sources use history, current examples, basically to argue against the idea that major U.S. successes didn't rely heavily on foreign contributions.
That's precisely how the sources frame that particular online debate.
Wow. Okay, we really did cover a huge amount of ground just scanning those trending X posts today.
Yeah.
I mean, from dreaming about Mars, hitting the reality checks, to digging into economic forecasts, trade fights, competing inflation claims.
Yeah, and right next to all that, those super relatable moments, battling spam calls, cheering for Taylor Swift owning her music, thinking about how we see aging differently based on gender, remembering that wild Tiffany Gomez moment.
Plus seeing politicians manage their image, deal with, unexpected things like black eyes from kids, and even how history gets used or maybe misused in today's arguments.
It really shows how tapping into these trending topics gives you this incredibly dynamic snapshot of everything buzzing online. It's this wild mix of huge global stuff and really personal human experiences all tangled together.
It definitely makes you think about how we process all this information flying at us. So as we wrap up this deep dive into today's digital vibe, here's something for you to chew on. Considering this rapid-fire tour we just took, Mars to spam calls to politics, how does consuming information this way, jumping between such different topics online, actually shape how you understand the world? What gets amplified, what maybe gets lost, and what does this whole collection of trending posts maybe say about our collective attention span today?